Welcome to Proving the Point, where we discuss important research papers that you should know about. Today we're going to talk about this paper called Ideological Differences in the Expanse of the Moral Circle. And what this paper looks at is basically how do conservatives and liberals differ in terms of their moral understanding of the world and how they approach morality. And what they find is that conservatives, they basically prioritize themselves and their own kin and basically socially close structures, so like their kin, their family, their friends, their community, their nation, over others. Whereas leftists, they basically do the opposite. So they'll prioritize things like inanimate objects above humans, and then non-humans above humans, and other humans above their own group. And so it's basically an inverted moral circle with an out-group focus. And so the reason the paper matters is because I think one of these moral approaches is obviously destructive to society, namely left-wing morality. It prioritizes the out-group, it neglects the in-group, and it's one of the reasons that the leftists are promoting things like mass immigration, welfare for foreigners, and things like that in our society, individualism, and they neglect our own race and our own ethnicity and our own population, whereas conservatives tend to prioritize those things. And so I think one of these moral philosophies is detrimental to a civilization, namely leftism, whereas right-wing morality, which is characterized by altruism directed toward the in-group, is beneficial to civilization. And so if we're going to understand how to improve our civilization, we need to understand the moral differences between the left and the right. So we're going to get into this paper. Starting with the introduction, they sort of give this overview of how Democrats and Republicans differ. So, for example, they talk about how Barack Obama, he would talk about the country's empathy deficit and encouraging people to basically broaden their sphere of concern to include like other nations and other people beyond our own communities. Whereas the Republicans were contrasted with this, saying, they tend to promise that they're going to help us and our families, so helping social groups that are closer to us. All right. And then they go on to say that the similar thing happened in 2016 whenever Hillary was basically advocating for globalism, meaning prioritization of all countries, whereas Trump was arguing in favor of nationalism, which is prioritization of our own country. And so, again, it's a battle of, do you want to prioritize that which is socially close to you or that which is socially far from you? And they give similar examples of this ideological battle taking place throughout Europe. And they give titles to this. So they talk about universalism. That's basically the left-wing approach, which is a set of morals directed towards more socially distant and structurally looser targets relative to socially closer and structurally tighter targets. So again, that would be like prioritizing all nations or prioritizing all races and all communities rather than just focusing on the one that you belong to. This is contrasted with right-wing morality, which is termed parochialism. And they say here, that refers to moral regard directed towards socially closer and structurally tighter targets. So again, that would be, like, for example, the family or your kin. Okay, so they say here, universalist moral circles and parochial moral circles in this context are concentric, with one encompassing the other. And so again, what they mean by that is simply that, you can view morality as a set of circles that are enclosed within each other, where the central circle is basically you and yourself, and then the next ring out from that is your family. The next ring out from that is your local community and friends. Next ring out from that is your kin, maybe your race and ethnicity. Next ring out from that is your nation, and then so on, until you ultimately get to, moral systems encompassing such broad entities that it even includes like non-humans and inanimate objects. So that's the idea of the moral circle. It's a set of concentric circles that describe the distance from yourself of different moral entities. So conservatives tend to devote energy and resources toward prioritizing those inner, more local and similar social entities, whereas liberals, they prioritize the more distant moral entities. Okay, they talk a little bit more about this distinction here. They say here that liberals tend to express compassion toward individuals broadly construed. So it's part of universalism because they're basically saying that all individuals in the world need to be considered equivalent morally and given equivalent moral standing, whereas conservatives emphasize compassion toward their immediate social groups. So again, that's like your family, your race, maybe your religious group too. All right, they say, these differences appear to stem also from a broader historical trend that has accelerated in recent decades as most countries have become wealthier and safer. So in other words, now they're wondering, like, what's the cause of these differences? And they say that basically as countries become wealthier and safer, people stop prioritizing the in-group and start focusing more broadly on the out-group. So they say here that this has been described by other researchers as fading existential pressures open people's minds, making them prioritize freedom over security, autonomy over authority, diversity over uniformity, and creativity over discipline. The existentially relieved state of mind is the source of tolerance and solidarity beyond one's group. So basically, because our nations don't really face any existential threats anymore, like we have plenty of food, most of us aren't in any danger of getting invaded or conquered by a hostile outgroup. Because the existential threats have gone away, there's no longer any pressure preventing people from becoming more tolerant of outsiders and open-minded. Now, again, they talk about that here as though that's a good thing to be more open-minded and out-group oriented. But I think it's kind of obvious to everybody now that that's been a huge mistake. So European countries have opened their borders to, tens of millions of non-white immigrants who are coming in, and they have a racial animosity toward us, and they hate our ancestors and our history. And we're too busy, being so blind to our own threats, existential threats, that most white people still try and shower these people with love and compassion. Okay, and we try to treat them as equals. But that's destroying our country because it's allowing them to come in and take advantage of us. All right, so these authors basically wanted to take all these ideas and perform their own study to further test this and provide more empirical evidence of this. So now we're going to go down and get into the results. Okay, so looking at figure 1, this shows basically how people distribute their love based on political ideology. So they did a massive survey of people with different political ideologies, and they separated them into very liberal, liberal, slightly liberal, moderate, slightly conservative, conservative, and very conservative. And then what they did is they had these people rate the amount of love that they devote either toward their family, which is the red bar, their friends, which is the green bar, or all others, which is the blue bar. And what you can see is that very liberal people, they devoted most of their love toward their friends and all others, and relatively little to their family. Whereas if you look over here in the very conservative group, the amount of love devoted to their family is very high and their friends is very high, but love devoted to all others is relatively low. So basically, conservatives are more likely to prioritize their friends and family over all others, whereas liberals are more likely to prioritize all others. So this is the first evidence they provide of that universalism among liberals. All right, we're going to skip table 1. This basically just shows the breakdown by like education level, age, and gender in terms of how they distribute out their love. But most of that's shown in these graphs, so we're going to skip it and focus on the figures. And so here, this is showing figure 2, and this is showing basically values related to universalism in blue or values related to nationalism in red based on political ideology. Okay, and so this is part of that survey. This shouldn't be very surprising, but as you can see over here on the left, the people who are very liberal, the values that they espouse are much more universalist and very low on the nationalist scale. Whereas as you go and become progressively more conservative, they become more nationalistic and less universalist. So as you can see, as you become more conservative, you're more focused on your own in-group and social groups that are nearer yourself, and you're less concerned about distant social groups. Okay. So the next figure, figure 3, is showing something similar, except now, again, broken down by political ideology. It's showing who do the people identify more with. Do they identify most with their community? Do they identify with their country? Or do they identify with all of humanity? Okay, so if you ask them who they are, they would say, I'm a human versus I'm an American versus, I'm part of this community. And what you can see is that the very liberal people, they mostly identify with all of humanity. Okay? They see themselves as human first and foremost. Whereas people who are very conservative, they identify themselves mostly with country. So they might say, I'm an American first and foremost. They also identify more with their community. So again, that just shows less universalism among conservatives. Okay, so next we're going to look at figure 4. This figure just shows that this concept applies even to non-human entities. So this shows basically if you were to get people of these different political ideologies and give them like a hypothetical amount of moral points to allocate either to humans or to non-humans, in terms of like who do you care about more and who's more morally significant to you, humans or non-humans. Okay, what you can see is that people who are very liberal, they're devoting basically an equal amount of those hypothetical moral points to humans and non-humans, because the blue line and the red line are close by right here. However, as you go more conservative, okay, people start to devote more and more points toward concern with humans and fewer points concerned with non-humans. And so if you look all the way over here at the very conservative people, they devote most of their resources, their hypothetical moral points to humans, and very few of them to non-humans. So that just shows that, liberals are often sort of misanthropic. They actually don't really care about humans as much as people of other political ideologies do. And that's part of their focus on the outgroup, okay? It's always focused on the most distant thing possible from themselves. And now this next figure, figure 5, you've probably seen this on like social media and in memes and things like that. It's very revealing, but it shows basically a heat map of the moral circle that I described earlier, where basically the morality is understood as a series of concentric rings where you are in the center, you and your immediate family are the focus here in the center, and then each ring out from that is like the next most related thing to you. So for example, circle number 1, as they say here, that's all of your immediate family. Circle number 2 is all of your extended family. Circle number 3 is all of your closest friends. 4 is all of your friends, including distant ones. Circle number 5 is all of your acquaintances. Number 6 is all people you've ever met. 7 is all people in your country. 8 is all people on your continent. 9 is all people on all continents. 10 is all mammals. 11 is all amphibians, reptiles, mammals, fish, and birds. 12 is all animals on Earth, including paramecia and amoeba. 13 is all animals in the universe, including alien life forms. 14 is all things in the universe, including plants and trees. 15 is all things in the universe, including inert entities such as rocks. And 16 is all things in existence. And so what they did is they took conservatives and they took liberals, and they basically gave them 100 hypothetical moral points. And they basically told them, okay, these are their 16 moral rings in the moral circle. Take your 100 points and allocate them out to these different rings based on how much you're morally concerned with that ring. So like, let's say you only care about your immediate family. You would devote 100 of your 100 moral points to your immediate family and none to any of these other rings. Let's say the only thing you care about is number 16, all things in existence. Well, then you would devote 100 of your moral points to ring number 16 and none to any of the other rings. Okay, but they got to devote their 100 points across these 16 rings, however they decided. And then what this heat map is showing is basically the average across many trials for conservatives and for liberals in the two different panels. And the darker the red, basically the more moral points were allocated to that set of rings. And so what you can see with conservatives is there's a lot of red around rings 2, 3, 4, and 5. And so that's immediate family, extended family, close friends, and all acquaintances. So basically they're more concerned with the people in their local community and with the people that they know and are related to. Okay, it gets less and less red as you go out toward these more distant rings on the moral circle. And that's simply telling you that conservatives don't care as much about that. They're not concerned about inert entities such as rocks as much as they are their close friends. Now, what's interesting is if you look at liberals, it's pretty much the exact opposite. So they have very little concern with their immediate family, their friends, their closest friends. They devote most of their moral resources to concerns about things like rocks or plants and trees and these more all-encompassing moral circles. And so this just shows a very big difference between conservatives and liberals. So shows that liberals are out-group oriented. They're always focused on everything as far away from themselves as possible. Whereas conservatives, they kind of need to take care of themselves first, then their family, then their community, then their nation, then the broader world. Liberals, they say, forget about my own family, my own friends, my own community, my own nation, my own race, and let's just focus directly on the broader world. Okay, and so that's pretty much it for the paper. It's kind of short. I would say the lessons from this are pretty obvious, and a lot of people have talked about this on, again, like social media and things like that. But it kind of highlights the fact that conservatives, it's not that they're selfish, it's just that they recognize there's an order of altruism. In other words, you can't just neglect those nearby you and just immediately focus on the entire world. You can focus on helping the whole world, but you have to do so only after you've helped create a strong community, and then that community is cooperated to create a strong nation and things like that. There's an order to morality and altruism. Liberals, on the other hand, maybe it's an attempt to virtue signal, but they try and jump straight to, oh, I care about everything. And what that causes is it causes them to neglect their local community, and it causes them to neglect their people and their race. And I think we're seeing the fruits of that ideology in our society today, which is, again, we're bringing in outsiders. We are prioritizing things like environmentalism at the expense of human thriving. And I think it's deleterious to our population. The conservative approach is much better. We need to focus on, maximizing our own well-being before we can help those around us. Once we've helped those around us, then we can help those farther away from us. Okay? Again, it's just a different attitude toward the order in which we should help other people. So this is just one of many psychological and behavioral differences between conservatives and liberals. And again, these things are important to discuss because if we're going to save our society, we need to basically convert people away from liberalism and back toward conservatism, because conservatism builds up civilizations while liberalism basically oversees their destruction. So maybe we'll talk about some other psychological differences between conservatives and liberals in future videos. But thank you for listening.